But Paul, I need you.
So does YouTube.
He has just left. He has just left. Over and out.
Message received. We are waiting. Over and out.
Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video we're breaking down The Spy Who Loved Me. Throughout this video, we're going to be going through the movie and discussing all the insane things that happened while making it. Ooh. Bloody hell. That includes this ski scene, which was suggested by George Lazenby during the making of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. We also have the incredible car chase and the introduction of the Lotus Esprit. Beyond that is the introduction of Jaws, who become the first ever henchmen to return down the line. Ugh. Fuck you, Ryan Airy! Oh! Oh shit!
A few moments later.
I wasn't looking, but somehow you found me. I tried to hide from your thumbs up. Like heaven above me, The Spy Who Loved Me is what we're going to break down tonight. You get the idea with that. Worst intro ever, but throughout this video we'll be keeping the British end up and going through one of my favourite films. And that's no joke considering the era it was released in. That saw Star Wars, Saturday Night Fever and Close Encounters, but Bond was able to still stand out amongst the crowd. I feel like it stood the test of time, and it's a movie I can't wait to discuss. We'll also be going through the book, which has a less than stellar reputation. With that out of the way though, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into The Spy Who Loved Me.
That's the part I like.
Now the journey to The Spy Who Loved Me was fraught with dangers, difficulty and death. Well, the death of a partnership that had made these films a success in the first place. The Man with the Golden Gun had underperformed both critically and commercially, and it just hadn't brought in the money the producers had gambled on. Harry Saltzman was facing some issues outside the films, and a number of his other projects had also underperformed. Though the Ipcris File had been a success in 1965, since then, his other projects had gone nowhere. Beyond that, his wife had terminal cancer, and he was also suffering from depression. Saltzman had apparently offered shares as collateral for loans, and he'd also attempted a hostile takeover of Technicolor. During this, Broccoli refused to allow him to leverage Danjaq, which caused a deadlock with Bond. Saltzman wouldn't allow any other Bond films to move forward, and it was another rights nightmare for the franchise. A rights mare, if you will. Thunderball had already caused a massive headache, and we'll talk about the other ones down the line. At this point in time though, Danjaq had a deal with United Artists that meant they had to produce a Bond film every 18 months or they'd run the risk of losing the rights. A rights mare, if you will. Thus, Broccoli and Saltzman were locked in a heated deal, with many negotiating to buy his shares. Broccoli was initially against taking them himself, but Columbia Pictures got involved and Broccoli didn't want them to end up with the studio. Which is funny because Sony, who owns Columbia, would later end up owning Bond. Either way, with Saltzman out of the way, the film could finally roll into production. And yeah, at the time, this was the biggest gap between films, but seeing the recent gaps between the movies, it's insane that 3 years was once seen as a long time. However, it is thought this was actually a bit of a good thing. The gap had given them some time to take a step back, and it offered some breathing room to refresh the franchise. Rather than rushing from one film to the next, Broccoli had time to think about what he wanted. However, in the James Bond archives, he says, logistically, this was the hardest film to make. They had to travel and shoot in Egypt, Sardinia, the Bahamas, Switzerland, England, and more. Even with all that though, Cubby says the most difficult thing was the script. We'll talk about the book more after the title sequence, but this is really the first film where they made up their own entirely original story. In our other breakdowns, we've talked about how you can see the producers gaining confidence with their own ability to craft a story, and slowly they'd stepped away from the source material. This is the first big ride without stabilizers, and I think the break gave Broccoli the time to do it. You of course also had the formula at this point, so it wasn't too difficult to play into that. Broccoli went to a number of writers including John Landis and also Jerry Anderson. Anderson was originally penned as Moonraker, though the plot for The Spy Who Loved Me did end up pretty similar. Cary Bates from DC was also approached as well. Bates is the longest running Superman writer of all time, and they actually also wanted Richard Donner to direct his work. Bates had Hugo Drax hijacking a submarine and operating from his base under Loch Ness. The submarine plot of course got kept, and Drax then became the villain of the next one. Tatiana Romanova also returned in this version as well, with her last being seen in From Russia with Love. I did wonder if the name Anya was playing off her nickname Tanya, but that's a bit of a theory. Anthony Burgess of A Clockwork Orange also provided a draft as well. In it, he brought characters across from his spy novel Tremor of Intent. Bond would fight the organisation Chaos, who are planning to assassinate Queen Lizzie. This would be done by blowing up the Sydney Opera House, and it'd be a more realistic film focused on terrorism. Well, to a point, because the archive says it had a boxing kangaroo in it. Landis' screenplay also revolved around the kidnapping of the Pope, but not much more is known beyond that. Broccoli then returned to old ally Richard Maybaum, who cherry-picked the best parts of each script. He handed in a draft that saw a sort of Legion of Doom organisation made up of the world's biggest terrorists. This international group featured the Red Bridges, Black September Organisation, and Red Army, who stormed the Spectre offices to kill Blofeld right round the opening. They then hold the world to ransom with atomic weapons and wanted to destroy Earth to usher in a new world order. Ultimately, Broccoli felt it was far too political and wanted to go in a different direction. At the same time, they were of course looking for a director, and Broccoli went to Guy Hamilton. He was busy though, going off and making Superman, but as we know, didn't work out, and this project was then given to Richard Donner. Broccoli had also wondered about getting a little unknown director named Steven Spielberg. However, he said he wanted to see how his shark movie did first. They'd heard it had been a production nightmare and didn't have much faith he was going to pull off another sea-soaked adventure. And yeah, we all know they were completely right, and Jaws did go on to become one of the greatest and biggest films of all time. But yeah, I do kind of feel like they sort of regretted that a bit, and we do get a sort of homage to Jaws with a Jaws versus Jaws fight in this movie. Spielberg was a massive fan of Bond as well, and Indiana Jones would end up becoming his take on the character, since he didn't get to do it here. And yeah, the tuxedo at the start of Temple of Doom is of course a nod to Goldfinger. In the end, Broccoli went back to Lewis Gilbert, who'd also made You Only Live Twice. This is basically the exact same movie as well, and yeah, Gilbert would go on to make Moonraker, which is also the exact same movie too. In both, the villains capture US and Soviet ships and try to start a war between the two sides. Blofeld had his Pac-Man spaceship, whereas Stromberg uses a tanker to swallow submarines. Both end with Bond sabotaging the control room and have lots and lots of similarities. Now, it was in the hiring of Gilbert that he decided to bring in writer Christopher Wood. Both felt that the prior two films had been doing it wrong, and they'd been trying to write more the way Connery played him. However, they ran into a snag when writing the script. A sort of rights mare, if you will. During Thunderball, McClory had signed a deal that meant though he had the rights to it, he couldn't make a film based on the story for 10 years. And guess what? That had now expired, and he was now starting to make headway on his film titled Warhead. McClory had managed to sign Sean Connery to play Bond, and it was gonna be the last time he would play him. The last time! For real this time. That of course went on to become Never Say Never Again, after Connery joked about how he was never coming back again. But obviously, you know, one of the big bads of the movie is Blofeld, and McClory had learned Eon were planning to use him in The Spy Who Loved Me. So he filed an injunction against the movie that would further delay production. So Broccoli basically just said, oh mate, do a find and replace on the script and remove all references to Blofeld and Spectre, which was a bit of a rights mare. They then went and shot the ski scene, and by the time that was wrapped up, the revised pages were approved and the injunction was lifted. This was actually a smart move as well, as in '76, McClory won the rights to both Spectre and Blofeld. Thus, they created Stromberg, who had a kind of tenuous connection to Blofeld. The book James Bond: A Celebration lists Captain Nemo as one of his inspirations. So creating the web-handed Stromberg wasn't too much of a stretch. Gilbert initially suggested Orson Welles to play him, but Broccoli was pissed. As I'm sure you know, he'd been absolutely furious at the production of Casino Royale and banned anyone who worked on it from being part of his pictures. Welles of course played the baddie, and we have a big review of that film on the channel if you want to hear our thoughts, which aren't that positive. But yeah, Kurt Jurgens was cast instead, though I would have loved to have seen Wells in the role. Jerry Anderson, he also threatened legal action as he said, look, I've given you this script, basically pitched you a movie and you've taken most of it and are now making that film without credit. So yeah, rather than messing around, Cubby just brought the rights to the original proposal and thus they went ahead. Tom Mankiewicz was also brought in to do some rewrites, but Broccoli couldn't give him credit because having too many non-British workers on a film meant that he wouldn't get the tax breaks. But yeah, it was a nightmare behind the scenes, but in the end, I think it all came together. Speaking of breaks as well, it's time to break down the movie, and as always, we begin with the gun barrel. Now we begin with a brand new gun barrel which was reshot due to a change in aspect ratio. Roger Moore also wears a tuxedo here and this tradition will carry on until the start of Casino Royale. From here we then cut to the most British looking submarine crew you've ever seen. The captain comes in and speaks to who I'm guessing is his second in command, who returns later in the movie during the finale. This also includes the guys sitting at the table who all get gunned down on the walkway, yay! But now though everyone's enjoying tins of baked beans and stuff until the ship starts to shake. I'm guessing this was done by just moving about the camera because the chess pieces on the dinner table don't wobble at all. Or maybe they're magnetic or something. If you work on a submarine, let me know below if you use magnetic chess pieces. I love the way this scene builds up tension though, as we don't learn what's causing this to happen. We just get the captain looking through the periscope before uttering the very ominous, "Oh my god." Now from here we cut at the Kremlin and meet KGB head General Gogol. Played by Walter Gotell, he returns from Russia with Love. Though they're two separate characters, in my headcanon, I always had he defected from Spectre and then worked his way up with the Soviets. Gogol's also named after Russian novelist Nikolai Gogol, and from here he becomes a mainstay in the franchise. He'd make his return in several films, with his last appearance being in The Living Daylights. Beyond this, early on the production were told they'd have trouble showing the movie in Russia, and this was due to the worry of how the West were portraying Russian characters. Thus, Gogol was shown in a pretty positive light so the film could be distributed in the country. Gogol is shown as a likeable counterpart to M, and he even has a secretary called Miss Rubelvich, which is of course playing off Miss Moneypenny. Anya gives a further nod to Moneypenny later on as she travels under the name Mrs. Sterling, with pound sterling being the currency in the UK. We then learn that one of the subs is missing as well, and thus Gogol's gonna put his best man on the job, well, best agent on the job. What I imagine was a great fake out at the time. It's here we cut to Michael Billington. Billington was in the headlines quite a lot as being cast as an ex-Bond, and he actually screen tested for the role more than any other actor ever. Nowadays, it seems like every time a British actor has a movie or shot, that the headlines run with the story that they're gonna be the next Bond. So having Billington here, I think would have been a great meta joke at the time. However, it is a fake out, and the best agent's actually Triple X, who's played by Barbara Bach. Triple X, of course, meant something totally different in the 70s, and it wasn't really associated with those Vin Diesel spy movies. Ask your dad what it meant if you don't know. It doesn't feel as on the nose as something like Pussy Galore though, and I appreciate how it sounds like it could be a genuine code name. Now they actually had lots of different women in mind for the role, with a frontrunner being Lois Charles. However, her agent said she'd retired from acting. Charles eventually did feature in a Bond film though, and we will talk about her more in our Moonraker breakdown. You might also notice that her music box plays the theme to Dr. Zhivago.
Agent Triple X.
According to IMDb trivia, this movie was actually banned in Russia at the time, so I'm guessing all the Russian audiences were probably like, what the fuck is this? But we love General Gogol. Mirroring the moment with Gogol, we then see M in London requesting Bond pull out of whatever it is he's up to.
Well, tell him to pull out.
Because of sex. It's here that we then cut to Bond, who gets what I imagine was the world's first text message. This is on the Psycho 0674LC watch, which Bond wears throughout the film. If you've been paying attention to my Instagram, then you'll know I've been addicted to buying watches, and I've become a bit obsessed with timepieces in quite an unhealthy way. But there was a comment who said I need to get a proper watch, and it was your fault. You sent me down this rabbit hole. Before this movie though, Bond tended to wear luxury Swiss watches, with him donning a Rolex and Goldfinger, and so on and so forth. However, during the quartz crisis of the 70s, highly accurate quartz watches hit the market. The battery could provide a regular current, which made them highly accurate when it came to timekeeping. Japanese quartz watches were a fraction of the price as well, and could be easily and quickly produced. So these flooded the market and meant that a lot of big brands faced job losses and bankruptcies. Casio and Seiko rose to the forefront, and they had bonded up these to stay at the cutting edge. It wouldn't be until decades later he went back to Amiga, which we will talk more about on our GoldenEye breakdown, and I did get the watch for it. Bond then dons his ski suit, which has become iconic in itself, and it's here we get one of the best, if not the best, opening scene in a Bond movie. Bond's chased by Anya's lover from the previous scene, and it puts an end to Billington's screen tests. He does this by skiing backwards and using a gadget-laden ski pole that carries ballistics. It reminds me a lot of the walking stick in the Casino Royale book that could also fire a bullet. This later inspired Valentin Segovsky's One in the World Is Not Enough, and it's such a great weapon for the scene. I love this score here as well, and this is one of my go-tos when I'm out jogging. The strings sound so sleek on it, and whenever I hear it, I immediately start sprinting. As much as I love John Barry as well, to the point he was actually my most played artist on Spotify last year, I think Marvin Hamlish kills it on the soundtrack. Barry did come back for Moonraker, but he wasn't allowed to work in the UK while this was being shot because the guy was apparently avoiding paying tax.
Right to jail, right away.
Bond then rides off the cliff, and yeah, it's probably my favourite moment in the entire series, and I just love the long silence as he falls and falls. You see the mountain range and then him fall past another and get the feeling of just how high up this is. You almost take a gasp as you're watching it and hold your breath as you wait for what happens. And then the parachute opens up. That's emblazoned with the Union Jack, and the audience at the London premiere went absolutely wild for it. Apparently, it got a standing ovation, and Prince Charles even stood up and cheered. Now, IMDb trivia says it's technically not the Union Jack, or it's the wrong way or something, but yeah, he didn't notice at the time. And who gives a fuck? But yeah, if you post a Union Jack online, chances are you've got a 50-50 chance of doing it the wrong way, and people will point it out to you. Since then, though, it's been often said to be the moment that Bond went from being a British character to a symbol of Britain itself. IMDb trivia notes that before this he was just seen as a spy, but now he was in the ranks of King Arthur, Robin Hood, and also Sherlock Holmes. It's such an insane stunt, and to top off the beginning with this just really means something. Performed by Rick Sylvester, Michael G. Wilson was the one who ended up suggesting it. Sylvester had done a ski jump for Canadian Club Whiskey where he fell from a great height and then popped out his parachute. Looking at all the elements here, you can see how it clearly influenced the movie. They wanted to recreate that for the opening of the film, and yeah, absolutely phenomenal. If the name Michael G. Wilson sounds familiar as well, he's the one who'd gone to shepherd the franchise with his half-sister Barbara Broccoli. I loved hearing that story and how even though he was just an assistant, he was still coming up with big things for the films. And yeah, it's difficult to think of someone better to hand the reins off to when they're doing stuff like this. Pulling it off was very dangerous though, and you can see the ski clip the parachute as it opens. Moore said on the commentary they were very lucky it didn't go horribly wrong. The disengaged one hitting it could have stopped the chute from opening, and Sylvester could have easily fallen to his death. On top of this, they had to clear the cliff, and you can see the snow spread to make a ramp in the lead up to the jump. What we get though is a stunt that basically set the bar for action movies at the time. Very few films were doing it at this level and making as big a spectacle as Bond was. I think it clearly influenced a lot of things after it, and there was a point where falling stunts were like my favourite things in movies. Moore followed it up with a parachuteless skydive, then we had the motorbike off the cliff in GoldenEye, and even Everything or Nothing has a moment where you dive off a cliff and free fall for the entire level. Ethan Hunt would also ride a bike off a cliff as well and use a parachute to catch it with the Orient Express. So I don't think you can deny the Bond influences there, especially as that train features in From Russia with Love. I see that is all coming back to this moment though, and what an incredible way to take the movie. It also set the precedent for Bond films beginning with a big stunt. Though we'd had things like the opening of Thunderball, beyond that the pre-title sequences weren't as big and bombastic. They were often just low-key espionage stuff. From now though, everything was trying to live up to this and come in with a big set piece to kickstart the movie. Dutch Bond fans summed the whole thing up perfectly in his video, where he said this is such a good metaphor for where the franchise was at. Bond was basically hurled into the abyss, and though there'd been a fall, he was back better than ever. The James Bond archives talk about how this is what Bond is at its essence, and it's brave and beautiful, which is what makes Bond James Bond. Just when you think we couldn't get any better as well, we see that nobody does it better and go into my favourite James Bond song. I think with me, I'm kind of an easy lay, and if the opening's good and the song's good, I'm probably gonna say it's the best movie ever. I know people who hate Another Way to Die, but that opening of Quantum and then the song, that makes me really enjoy the rest of the movie. Don't boo me, I'm right. But this is just a classic, and I think it's going to rank highly on most people's lists. Himmlisch was apparently inspired by the work of Mozart, and he features his Concerto No. 21 later in the movie. There's also air on a G string, and it's clear he looked at classical pieces rather than delving into the Bond soundscape, which I think you really get from the piano that opens it up. Because of not picking up on the Bond horns and stuff, I think the song was a real turning point in terms of themes. Goldfinger had been something most songs were trying to mimic, and a lot of them used that as their basis. However, this took things in a different direction that would then be mimicked for a lot of the following films. For Your Eyes Only, All Time High, they all kinda owe it to this. But to me, nobody does it better. Carly Simon's such a left field choice, but she fits the tone of the movie so well. I love how she just serenades the spy, and it's a sort of love letter to the character. I also think it kind of builds nicely off the back of her previous big hit, You're So Vain. Lyricist Carol Bayer-Sager actually suggested Simon after writing out the lyrics and realizing how vain they were. And yeah, anytime someone says you're so vain or this is so vain, chances are your mind's gonna go to Simon. I think this is one of those songs that goes beyond just being a Bond song though, and it's something that stands on its own 2 feet. This was the first Bond song nominated for an Academy Award, and it paved the way for stuff like Skyfall, Writings on the Wall getting one for some reason because it's terrible, and No Time to Die getting nominations as well. Now, the book's a bit of a weird one, and it's something Fleming ended up hating. He was pretty strict in his instructions that though they could have the title, they weren't allowed to turn this into a movie. And when you read it, you can understand why. This makes it the first Bond film to be completely original, with the second being GoldenEye in 1995. This was Fleming's 8th novel to date, and you can tell he was getting a bit sick of the character. He even considered killing Bond in this book and was worried people were taking the wrong lessons from the character. Much to his surprise, the stories were read in school and Bond was seen as a bit of a hero. So he decided that it was time to write a cautionary tale that would put the record straight on how bad Bond was. Written from the perspective of Viv Michelle, it's basically a woman's diary. The work feels like a bit of a writing exercise in which Fleming's trying something different. Split into 3 sections, we get them titled as Me, Them and Him. These tell the tale of her 3 lovers and all the hardships that followed. The first is Derek Malaby, who she has sex with in a field after being thrown out of cinema. Viv really liked him, but he sent her a letter saying he was engaged. The next man was a German called Kurt Rayner, who she ended up falling pregnant to. He basically talked her into having an abortion, which is still a hot point today, and when this book was written, I can imagine it was an even bigger thing. She even has to travel to Switzerland to do it, and low point for the character. Viv then goes home to Canada and she decides to go on a road trip. Starting a job at the Dreamy Pines Motel, the owner wants to burn it down for insurance money. This leads to 2 mobsters arriving in the form of Slugsy and Horror. The latter has steel-coated teeth, which is the only element that they bring across. Taking her hostage, she's then saved by the arrival of Bond. Obviously, things come to a head and Bond ends up saving her life. The pair make love, he humps and dumps, and then abandons her in the morning. He leaves a note explaining who he is, and she does seem a little smitten. However, an officer says that men like Bond are dangerous, which is basically Fleming explaining it to the reader. Now, the book was lambasted at the time, with people saying they wish Fleming had written things the old way. I kind of liken it to things like The Last of Us and Last Jedi, where it subverts expectations to the point that people end up hating it. At its core though, I actually don't think it's that bad. Now, I was heavily prepared for what was coming and had been warned by multiple people. I actually think though, it's a pretty solid read. However, I can totally understand at the time if you picked up a Bond book and then he doesn't arrive until 2/3 in, and you'd be like, what the hell is this? After it, you then have to wait for if there was even going to be another book, and I can get why people were angry. Since reading it though, I think it recontextualizes how I view Bond. Rewatching No Time to Die, Madeline tells a story to her and Bond's daughter about the dear old agent. Coupling that with this, I've started to see maybe all the Bond stories as something told by the women who loved him in that story. Same way if you know someone from a couple of years back that you'll tell a story about and some of the details that they're obviously going to be off. But there will be the same sort of people around them that makes the story the story. So M, Moneypenny, they're all people that you mentioned during it. To me, that also explains how we have Bond basically as a character who can exist across different decades without ever really changing. Just something to think about, and yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. Now, why I'm bringing this up is because I feel like the song is almost like an extension of the book. You could see the person singing it as being Viv herself, and she's serenading us with the tale of the spy who loved her. So at this point, we cut back to Russia where Triple X enters the Kremlin. Informed by Gogol that her lover's been killed, she's desperate to find out who did it. And I love as we cut to Bond right after she asks. Mirroring Anya's official dress, we see Bond in his naval uniform with it touching upon his past as a commander. There's even theories that Bond 26 may delve into his role there and fill in the agent's time in the service. I've always loved this look though, and it returns from Gilbert's You Only Live Twice. It's in this scene that we meet Sir Frederick Grey for the first time, who's played by Geoffrey Keane. Keane would reprise the role a number of times, with his last appearance also being in The Living Daylights. It's here that we also have Robert Brown as Sir Admiral Hargreaves. Brown would later take on the role of M in Octopussy, but things have gotten a wee bit confusing. Calvin Dyson has done a big video breaking down all the M's and how technically he's the same character that Bernard Lee's playing in this movie. They never really explicitly state it, so I've always just taken it as Hargreaves taking over the role in the wake of M's death. Though the novelization of those later films do list him as Miles Messervy, so it's getting a bit messy. To make things even more confusing, we also have George Baker playing Captain Benson. He played Sir Hilary Brain on Her Majesty's Secret Service, with this also being a completely different character. I think back then we didn't have like big VHS collections or access to millions of films at the touch of a button. Even conversations like, where's he from? I recognise him from something. You couldn't just look it up and instantly get the answer. So recasts like this were pretty common. I doubt Broccoli was thinking losers would be sat in a room 70 years later making 90-minute long videos talking about it, because he probably couldn't imagine someone being that much of a loser. Well, you are wrong, Broccoli, you are bloody wrong. Fuck you. Turns out though, there is a submarine tracking system in Egypt which Q goes into great detail on. Tracking the wake of a sub, this is a real-life technique used to discover ships and subs. Devices analyse and detect physical and chemical changes in water and then use this to pinpoint a vessel. The Brits are terrified it'll blow a hole in their naval defence, and thus Bond sent out to Cairo. We then cut to Atlantis. This was inspired by the floating city of Aquapolis, which the team actually wanted to shoot at. Plans fell through though, but they still took the idea of a floating city and then ran with that for the plot. It's here we meet Stromberg, who right from the off is shown in all his lavish wickedness. He's in a room adorned with artwork and tapestries and sat at the head of a banquet table with a massive meal purely just for him. Right from the off, he's feeding his staff to sharks, blowing up scientists midair rather than paying them, and we also see his dining room's actually part of an underwater base which rises to the surface. He's just very dastardly but completely living it up. At the back we can also see Botticelli's Birth of Venus, which actually inspired Ian Fleming to create Honeychild Rider's Introduction from the Sea. She of course came out of the water and his secretary gets dumped into the water. I love just the over-the-top shoot from the elevator though, which drops her right into the tank. There she's torn apart by a tiger shark, which are very vicious man-eaters. I have no idea how they managed to shoot these scenes, as this and the Jaws ones seem to be completely real. This one was shot with stuntwoman Marilyn Galsworth using what were apparently highly trained sharks. Though I'm not sure how much you can train a shark, and I did wonder if they just told her that so she'd go and get in the water. They also filmed some underwater stuff in the Bahamas and then just spliced the two scenes together. Overall, it was a mix between dummy sharks, shots of live ones, and incredibly brave stunt people that gave the illusion that she and Jaws were fighting for their lives. All in all, it's also an excellent intro to the bad guy, with it being probably the most lavish villain that we've seen in a movie thus far. However, there's someone else who comes in that I feel has left a very long-lasting impression.
Every person who even comes into contact with that microfilm is to be eliminated.
Now, it's here we meet Jaws and Sandor. The latter is played by Milton Reed, who also played a god during Dr. No. Reed also auditioned for Oddjob, with him losing the part to Harold Sakata. As for Jaws, probably up there as one of the most, if not the most memorable henchmen, and that's all because of James Bond Jr.
He learned the game from his Uncle James. Now he's heir to the game. James Bond!
Now, he obviously gets 2 movies, so he leaves a really long-lasting impression. They become mates by the end of Moonraker, which is also something that you rarely see. Even with just the 1 film though, I think he'd be absolutely unforgettable. Just the hulking Richard Keel and those short metal teeth, they create someone incredible to look at. I've always thought that the best henchmen are the ones with very little dialogue, who basically impose on the scene using nothing but their body. That was of course seen in Oddjob, but Jaws also does it as well. Keel was picked after the producers saw him in The Silver Streak, where he also played a henchman with metal teeth.
Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
I think from the off, they knew they had something special, and they actually changed the script during mid-production. Jaws was originally supposed to die, and Bond would use the magnet to drop him in a furnace. That was storyboarded and rehearsed, but in the end, Bob Simmons suggested keeping him alive. Cubby suspected Jaws was going to be massive, and thus they wrote an alternate ending. Apparently, audiences cheered when they saw him swim away at the end, and he returns next time, and also in Everything or Nothing. Anyway, it's here that we get our first clear homage to Lawrence of Arabia. We join Bond travelling through Egypt in order to meet with an old chum. And yeah, if you've seen this classic, you'll instantly recognise the iconography that they're tapping into. However, there's a much more on-the-nose nod to the film later, as Bond and Anya head through the desert. That score comes directly from the film, with it apparently initially only being a joke by an editor. Everyone loved it though, and they thought that audiences would as well, so they decided to keep it in the movie. This is kind of just a stop off to learn about who he needs to meet though, and we discover a bit about Bond's time at Cambridge. This guy's basically living it up in the desert, and Bond gets to experience some of the treasures of Egypt.
When one is in Egypt, one should delve deeply into its treasures.
Scene is just kind of an exposition dump that sets up Calber and Fekish, and kind of is about sex trafficking, is it? I don't know, mate. I don't even think this character gets a name. Anyway, what does Sean Connery's James Bond say when he can't be bothered to do something? Fekish. Now, I love the score here as Bond arrives in Cairo, and the silhouette of him against the sky looks excellent. There's just a mood and mystery to it, and Bond goes to Fekish's apartment. This was filmed at the Guy Anderson Museum, with him using the ceremonial hall and rooftop. It's here that he meets a woman who's there to distract him while Sandor shoots him in the back. Little did they know though, that no one can resist Bond's charm, and he's got it turned up to 11. She clearly falls in love with him straight away, and then screams out to alert him to Sandor. Bond returns the favour by using her as a human shield, and I'm not gonna lie, this scene always killed me. Like, she literally just met him, and completely fucks up the plan because she's fallen in love with him, and Bond proper doesn't give a shit, and just kinda gets her to catch the bullet and then tosses her to the side. That's classic Bond. He then chases up after Sandor, and we get a great moment where Bond coldly interrogates and kills him. I've always loved this moment, and just him snapping away the tie as Sandor falls to his death shows the cold psychotic side of Bond that we rarely get to see. It also highlights Moore's range, as at the start of the scene, he's seducing a random woman who never meant nothing to no one and did deserve to die, and then in the next scene, coldly killing Sandor even after he's answered his questions. It's just a great moment, and this then takes us to the pyramids. In what's a gorgeous scene, we join the real-life sound and light show that was shown at the site for several decades. I love the way darkness and light's used constantly throughout the scene, and it allows several characters to appear and disappear at will. I feel like this inspired the opera scene in Quantum of Solace, and we see Anya and Fekish sitting in the aisle while Bond stares on.
You have come tonight to the most fabulous and celebrated place in the world.
If that voice sounds familiar as well, then it's for a very good reason. Charles Gray actually narrated the scene, marking his third appearance in the franchise after Dicko Henderson and Blofeld in Diamantes Are Forever. Anyway, Bond tells Fekish, and we also see that someone else is following him as well. I love the way Jaws appears, and it kickstarts a moment in which a cardboard cutout of Bond follows him. And that is not a joke. When Bond's tailing Jaws, they actually used a photograph of Roger Moore to position him hiding around a corner. I don't think anyone would ever notice this was just a photograph, and he'd probably only ever pick up on it if an annoying British man pointed it out. The pyramids and Sphinx were all models as well, and a lot of the scene was fake. What do you mean Jaws' teeth aren't real? We do see them in action though, and I love the way we watch him bite through the chain. It just implants the idea of his bite down on Feckish, and you fill in the blanks without seeing it due to watching this scene. According to IMDb trivia, this chain was actually made of licorice, which would have been a nice tasty treat. I love how Jaws is framed as well as he enters the tomb, which is rather fitting as well. Jaws completely towers over Feckish, and he appears like he's more than a man. Richard Kiel was massive and over 7 feet tall, and you really feel it in this moment. Even later on when he grabs Moore's head on the train, I always remember thinking how his hands are bigger than Moore's whole head. Jaws then disappears into the darkness, and it just adds to the idea that he's almost like a vampire. It's here that Bond then finds the book, which has the name Caliber in it, as well as the meeting place. Bond then heads outside and comes face to face with Anya and her goons. I love this fight scene of the operatic music, and it just gives the whole thing a really epic feel.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Good night.
Just the way Bond neatly straightens his tie as well and leaves and gives a little line to Anya, yeah, all works perfectly. Bond then heads to meet Calber in the most 70s tux you've ever seen. Also, love these two guys who are clearly just stood at the entrance waiting for their cue, and they then robotically walk out of frame. Just no expression on either of their faces. It's here that Barbara Bach then enters wearing one of the best dresses in the whole franchise. I don't think Bond's tux has aged well at all, but you could definitely wear this today, and maybe I will if 1 million of you sign up to our membership. I will do another breakdown of this movie wearing nothing but this. I have the James Bond style guide from Asoline. This will get me the right fittings for that dress. It's here though that we really see the female equivalent of Bond theme in full effect.
Royal Navy, licensed to kill, and has done so on numerous occasions. Many lady friends, but married only once. Wife killed.
All right, you've made your point.
Now this also clarifies that Bond is in fact the same character as Lazenby's. The codename theory is something that's hovered around the franchise like Kevin McClory, but this clears it up that it's all the same character. Unless I like hiring nothing but agents with dead wives and giving them all the same name. I think this turn from Moore is also really well portrayed though, with it clearly still getting to him. No matter how many random women he sleeps with, makes them catch bullets, I love how all these years later, Tracy is still a chink in his armour. They also had to cut a line by Tom Mankiewicz that was going to reference Tatiana, and thus this film would have given nods to both Connery and Lazenby's run. When you think about it, this movie actually references Bond's past more than a lot of the other films before it. We have the naval uniform, his friend that he went to Cambridge with, and then this little nod to his wife. Bond fans have absolute bare bones when it comes to origin story stuff, but I appreciate that 10 movies in, we're starting to get nods to the greater world. The two then go to meet Calber to try and barter for the microfilm. He's got a clear preference because of that dress, but fate has other plans. Going to take a phone call, he finds the line dead. Dead like him, eh? Hey! Jaws then launches another attack, and we get a bit more of the bite, including Calber's horrified face. As it ramps up to his death, the music and dance does as well, and I absolutely love how this is edited. Now Jaws, this guy, his backstory is explored in the Spy Who Loved Me novelization, which is not to be confused with the book. Christopher Wood explains he was born in Poland and has the name Zbigniew Krzyzewski. His dad was a strongman in a traveling circus, whereas his mother was a prison warden in Krakow. They didn't stay together long, and Zbigniew, or Jaws as I'm going to call him, he suffered from violent outbursts at school. Due to his height, he joined the school basketball team, but he was very slow and clumsy and constantly outwitted. He was then arrested after participating in the 1972 bread riots where police brutally beat him. Using hollow steel clubs encased in leather, they broke his jaw in several places. He then escaped and stowed away on one of Stromberg's ships. Seeing he could use him for his physical prowess, he paid for him to get an artificial jaw. Using steel components, he was modified with razor-sharp teeth. In real life, these were extremely difficult for Keel to wear, and he could only have them in for about 30 seconds at a time. Thinking he's taking too long, Bond then goes to find Calba and discovers he's out of order and the microfilm's gone. But the window's open and he notices a 7-foot tall man doing a dad run to a Sherpa van. The pair then hop in, which takes them out to the desert. They get to know each other in the back, and I love how Jaws is listening in on their conversation. The attraction between the pair is starting to build though, and Bond lets her sleep on his shoulder. It nicely plays into the tension that he's killed her ex-boyfriend, and you do wonder if she's gonna kill him in revenge or if she's gonna fall in love. I'll let you guys guess what happens. They then drive to the ruins of Carac, which is one of the film's best locations. In the archives, they talk about how they were walking past these columns that were as big as a house and then spotted a golden eagle under a ledge. It was out of the rain and untouched by the elements and had remained in pristine condition for thousands and thousands of years. And I think that kind of wonder and awe leaps off the screen. We then get a big fight with Jaws as he's in what I think's his most iconic outfit. This is always how I imagine the character, with his braces and the top couple of buttons undone on his shirt. I think that's probably, you know, because of GoldenEye 64, but he of course wears this getup throughout this and most of Moonraker. And I do wonder if it was a bit of a happy accident. The archives say Keel lost his luggage upon arriving in Egypt, and with him being such a big man, getting replacements was an absolute nightmare. He had all custom clothing, which was difficult to get right. A rightsmare, if you will. They said they had to make bespoke shoes which were so big they could sail the Nile. Their joke, not mine. I do wonder if that's why his costume was scaled down here though, as I don't know if you'd sit down and design your big bad henchman to look like this for so long. Bond and Anya then make their way through the labyrinth of columns and we almost get a judo chop. The way the score plays out here as well also reminds me a lot of the opening of Russia and the maze scene between Grant and the fake Bond. Jaws has them both at his mercy though, and the guy's even able to teleport and move up the top of columns. Now, but it's a great moment and it just adds to the labyrinthian feel and feeling that he's more than 2 steps ahead. Making his move, we see how he outmatches them both. When there's a gun drawn, he tosses the microfilm to the ground, and this leads to Anya picking it up. I love this shot as well, and couldn't help but think that they later reference it on the poster for Your Eyes Only. Jaws kicks away the gun, and Anya grabs the film and makes a dash, but Bond takes him out using his size against him. It's kind of like one of those boss fights where you get the big hulking character to hurt themselves, and he destroys some scaffolding, which seemingly buries him. This starts off the motif that Jaws is basically indestructible, and I love how he constantly comes back after being beaten throughout the film. I'm sure you've heard it, but just in case you haven't as well, a representative from the Egyptian government was actually on set throughout all these scenes to make sure the country was shown in a respectable light. Guessing the tent trafficking scene was shot at Pinewood. During the scene though, Bond utters this line.
Egyptian builders.
Now they were a bit worried that they might have to cut it, so Moore just mouthed the line and they then dubbed over it. However, it apparently got a big laugh from Egyptian audiences, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who's actually offended by it. Well, don't check Twitter though. Yeah, don't check Twitter. Bond then makes it back to the van, and having thought ahead, he's grabbed the keys. Jaws isn't out the fight yet either, and he then single-handedly rips apart the ride as Bond plays about with the keys. According to IMDb trivia, Moore's responses were completely unscripted here, and Buck couldn't actually drive stick in real life, so she had difficulty starting up the van. It's a great moment though that has some of the best and worst one-liners in the film, but yeah, I love how relaxed Bond is as Jaws just tearing the van apart. I don't think many people could pull this off either, because it just keeps the levity of the scene even though there is a sense of danger. Eventually they escape, and we end the scene with Jaws dropping a comedically large stone on his foot. I've seen some people say that they hate the turn this takes, and that from this moment Jaws kind of becomes a joke. But I still think that's part of its charm, and I see this as the first Bond movie that also really works for kids, and yeah, when I was young, loved this moment. This is then followed by the rickety fan stumbling through the desert before then breaking down. All in all, it's an excellent midpoint of the movie though, and whereas most films would probably slump here as they hit the boat ride, they end it in a great way by having Anya knock Bond out with some very dodgy cigarettes. And we've all had those funny cigarettes from Egypt, mate. Better make sure the Egyptian rep isn't here. They were great. No, they were great, and I definitely didn't triple my risk of lung cancer. Bond, of course, used a cigarette that fired a rocket in You Only Live Twice, though, and I definitely feel that this is a play on that. Bond then awakens to find the microfilm gone, and it's here that he heads to the hidden MI6 headquarters. In the prior film, they fashioned that out of a sunken ship, but yeah, they've dug right into the Great Temple of Ramses II. It's one of Egypt's greatest monuments, and a truly breathtaking spectacle of wonder that MI6 have dug out to build submarine cars and trays that can behead mannequins. Here he meets Moneypenny though before coming face to face with Gogol, XXX and M.
Good morning, sir.
There's been a change of plan.
Pooling their resources to find out what happened, the Russians share the microfilm as a sign of good faith. However, Bond points out it's useless and makes Anya look stupid in front of her boss. There is the potential that Q can make something out of it though. We then get a tour of Q Labs, which is where we get some of the more light-hearted gadgets that have started to pepper these scenes. There's an ejector seat, a shisha machine gun, and an oil slick cannon that I believe is later used in the car. They then sit and scan the microfilm, and I love how Bond and Anya are constantly trying to one-up each other to impress their boss.
Well done, James.
Actually, sir, it is in Sardinia.
In scanning the microfilm, they then see someone has left something that points to Stromberg, and I sure hope someone got fired for that blunder.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
Realizing they need their best working together to take down the bad guys, the two agencies decide to form an alliance.
Do you want to form an alliance with me?
This then takes them to the train across Sardinia. This scene clearly echoes the one from In Russia with Love and also Live and Let Die. They even reuse the ambient sound effects from those films and cut the music away completely when the action starts. Starts off a bit sweet and flirty though, and Anya and Bond basically touching upon previous missions but having to keep stum because of, the things the job entails. Bond suggests a nightcap, but they've got an early morning, but we do get a kind of will they, won't they, as he shifts things about the room and she touches against the door. Plays things really nicely to lure us into a false sense of security, and then we get a great jump scare of Jaws hiding in the cupboard. Going to chow down on Anya, Bond busts in to save the day, but we do get a pretty one-sided fight scene. However, Bond has the brains to battle the Brawn, and I love how he uses the lamp to save the day from the jaws of defeat. Kicking him out the window, this also mirrors how he defeated Teehee on the train in his first film. Bob Simmons performed the stunt of diving out the train, and the archives state he had a pretty bad accident. He actually smashed his head off the plate glass and then went tumbling down the hill. The archive says stuntmen don't normally tell you when they're hurt, but this one was pretty bad. It was also Richard Keel's idea to stand up and dust himself off before straightening his tie. When Keel met with Cubby about the role, he did think it sounded like a pretty crappy part. However, in the back of his mind, he had a voice saying, "But it's a James Bond movie." So Keel apparently said, "Cubby, I want to bring some humanity to the character," and Cubby replied with, "I like that." David Prowse was also considered to play him, but he'd of course played Darth Vader in the exact same year, and I think everything worked out for the best. Prowse was a massive part of making Vader iconic, and Keel of course made Jaws iconic as well. So yeah, it just worked out perfectly. All the little touches that Jaws has though, that Keel injected in, are what to me take him from being a pretty forgettable henchman like Mr. Hinks, who you could argue is played by a much more famous actor, to someone who ranks as one of the best baddies in the franchise. Overall, it's a great scene in which the train gets smashed up, and stylistically it shows also the difference between Moore and Connery. Both this and the Red Grant scene are basically the same thing on paper, but they're both handled in completely different ways. Anya also says she'll tend to Bond's wounds, and we get some romance to a cheesy jazz version of the theme.
Why don't you lie down and let me look at it?
Now, upon getting off the boat, Bond meets with Q in the brand new Lotus Esprit. Kind of touched upon how this movie was really when they started to make Moore his own man, and I think this is another thing that sort of differentiates him from Connery. Rather than trying to squeeze Bond into his Aston Martin, they've given Moore his own car with this Lotus Esprit. Now look mate, before you start mate, I know this is red, and technically, this isn't the S1, but I hope you guys let me off when you hear a little story about how this came to be. So I've been looking for months and months for a while for the one from the movie and finally managed to locate an owner. They lived about a 2 hours drive away, but everything looked like it was all going to work out. However, winter struck. The guy didn't want to put the car on the road because of the salt, and he said he was just going to leave it in the garage. So I hit up David Zaritsky asking if he knew an owner, and it turned out that Phil from the 007 GB Club owned one. So I hit him up, but he'd moved and hadn't taken delivery on the car. However, he put me in touch with an owner who lived down south. Setting off from my house to this station and then getting 3 trains down there, it would take about 8 hours and then 8 hours back. But look, you guys support the channel, so I was going to do it and force Stephen to do it as well. Christmas then came and I went up to my mum's and stepdad's house, and my mum started showing me about this garage that you see here. All of a sudden, I spotted a sleek shape under a tarp, and though I don't normally go around just lifting stuff up, curiosity got the best of me. Upon opening it up, I saw the Lotus logo and I genuinely couldn't believe it. So yeah, apologies for not getting the exact car, but having this one handed to me after months of searching, I'm gonna take it. Especially because I also need to talk about a Lotus Esprit Turbo for your eyes only. So, the long and short of this is that I think not only does it show that God exists, but also that he subscribes to heavy spoilers, and you should too. Anyway, we see the beautiful car roll out and it has the license plate PPW36R. This shows it was registered in Norwich, which is home of the historic Lotus car factory. The Bond cars, the definitive history book, goes into the full story behind it and how it came to be in the movie. Lotus were actually trying to get a deal on the new Avengers and were constantly visiting Pinewood. At the time, Lotus head of PR, Don McLaughlin, heard Eon were looking for a different car for Bond, and thus he drove the prototype Esprit down to the Eon offices. He parked it outside and went for lunch, knowing the car would catch their eyes, for their eyes only. Upon returning, he found lots of people standing around it and then just got in, said he was busy and drove off, which I think is hilarious. This of course sat with him though, and it wasn't too long before they'd made contact and were working out a deal. Basically, he wooed them into trying it. The car was designed by Giorgetto Gioreri, whose name I've completely butchered, but he's basically a god when it comes to car designers. He'd later go on to design the DeLorean, and I think you can see shades of that here in the Lotus. But getting it in the movie wasn't straightforward. Lotus were currently only producing one of the cars a week, and they didn't have the 2 ready the studio needed. However, Don convinced the chairman that this was a Bond movie, and thus they rolled ahead. However, Eon did some test shoots and they didn't think the car looked good in the action sequences. So Lotus's top test driver Roger Becker showed them how he handled it, and he did a very dramatic 180-degree turn. They were so impressed they booked the car and him as the film's stunt driver and even had him perform it in the movie. And it's by far one of the slickest bits of stunt driving I've ever seen in the film. They also decided on white as it would look really great in Sardinia, and I think it really pops off the screen. Upon driving to the press announcement in Paris, Don also left the fake 007 license plates on it. He got pulled over by the French police, and then when he explained he was running late to a Bond conference, they gave him a personal escort. And I know the police get a bad reputation, but alright, they were like, it's making the Bond movie, mate, let's get the convoy and don't solve that murder, let's get on this. We then watch as Q explains the gadgets to Bond. Dutch Bond fan pointed out a detail that I love in that we don't actually hear Q explaining what's in the car, so we get a surprise later on when we see its tricks. At this point, we had a couple of scenes with Q explaining stuff, so we don't even need to hear it to know that he's going through the gadgets. And it just works really well to keep things feeling fresh. The car is of course gorgeous as well, and Lotus really fought to get it in the movie. The gamble paid off though, and sales surged following the film's release. According to IMDb Trivia, the company had to create a waiting list that was going up to 3 years. When we were looking at trying to book the car as well, my editor Matt said, hit up Elon Musk. I thought he was taking the piss, but it turns out Musk bought the one in the film in 2013. He said he planned to rebuild it as a submarine, but so far that's yet to be seen. However, that is of course what elevates this car above a lot of the other ones in the franchise. Dubbed Wet Nelly after Little Nelly and You Only Live Twice, the car takes to the sea later in the movie. In total, Lotus gave 11 cars to the production team, with them being used for various purposes. The engine also sat low enough so that they could fit a camera crew in one and use it to film the chase. One was also cut in half to film the interior scenes. They also had an empty shell that was shut off the pier using a compressed air cannon, and one designed to fit a full scuba gear and operate while being filled with water. They also had a specific underwater one fitted to fire a missile out the roof. Overall though, it's completely iconic and as important to this film as the DB5 was to Goldfinger. The underwater stuff was driven by ex-Navy SEAL Don Griffin, with a conversion costing about $100,000. Or about $450,000 today. On the pier, Anya also addresses Q as Major Boothroyd.
Good morning, Major Boothroyd.
Morning, Major.
This is the rarely acknowledged character's real name, and it's what he was called in from Russia with Love. In case you missed it, which, what are you doing, why did you miss it? But in case you missed it, Fleming basically named him after a fan who wrote to Fleming saying, oh, actually, Bond should have a Walther instead of a Beretta.
Q, have I ever let you down?
Frequently.
Bond and Anya then meet with Naomi, who's played by Caroline Munro. The producers actually saw her in a Lamb's Navy rum advert where she'd often wear an unzipped wetsuit. This caught Cubby's eye and he thought she'd be perfect for the role. Which I bet it did. She actually got offered the role of Ursa in Superman but turned it down to film this movie instead. They then head out to Atlantis, which is a pretty great scene showing it in all its spectacle. The effects here, to be fair, are a bit dated as we pan to the wide shot, but the models and boat blends really well, I think. She then takes them to Stromberg, and I love how Naomi says,
Oh, by the way, Mr. Stromberg prefers not to shake hands.
Bond tries to do this when they first meet, but Stromberg refuses to. The villain, of course, has webbed hands, and it's just a nice way to play into his insecurities. Because yeah, I can't imagine basically having a conscience over every person you meet, seeing your hands, and you kind of being embarrassed by it. So over time, I think he'd just stop shaking hands. There's some very creepy details in the tank though, such as the secretary's arm and deadly killers floating just behind the glass.
And there is death.
Bond is undercover as well, and he uses his know-it-all kind of persona to basically bluff himself off as an expert to Stromberg.
Terrorist politics. Other fish avoid it.
Stromberg explains his underwater city and how soon it will be a reality. Brushed to the side, Bond's basically kicked out, but he then goes out to reunite with Anya and Naomi. It's here they also see a model of his supertanker. Things start to fall into place and they head back to the mainland. However, Stromberg is well aware they're spies and he sends Jaws and his gang to kill them in Sardinia.
Let them get ashore. And then kill them.
Don't know why, you couldn't just do it here, mate, but we get a motorbike with a rocket sidecar on, so I'm down for it. This was crafted out of a Z900 and made large enough so a stuntman could lie inside of it. Possessing 10-inch scooter wheels, the driver then laid down and steered it using a panel built into the nose. This was pretty slow when they were filming it, but the footage was sped up so it seemed like it was rocket propelled. I love the shot of the bike going over the cliff as well, and though it's a dummy, it's just a really nice death.
All those feathers and he still can't fly.
Bond also has his own gadgets as well, and the definitive history of Bond cars show the sketches that they drew up to map out the vehicle. Which yet, don't know how well you can see it there, we'll put a bigger graphic alongside on screen, but fantastic sketch work. Jaws then arrives with a team in a Ford Fiesta, but they're quickly dispatched by the oil slick which comes out the license plate. I love how Jaws is just way too big for the car as well, and some of the behind the scenes images show him absolutely dwarfing it. Just the way he grabs the other guy's gun when he runs out as well, it just adds some personality to the chase. Bond sends him over a cliff and into a house as well, and he just walks out having survived another brush with death. On land though, the chase continues with Naomi arriving in a Bell helicopter. These had been used by Eon throughout the franchise, and they named Mrs. Bell and Live and Let Die after them. The stunt driving's absolutely brilliant though, and watching the bullets pepper the land, the little wink between Bond and Naomi, it just all works so well. But Bond realizes that he's completely outmatched. Thus he drives off a pier, which is another extremely iconic shot. Below the water, he fires a torpedo and finally takes out the chopper. This is done through using a model version with him using Alka-Seltzer tablets to form the bubbles as it fires. It also marks the first time that Bond kills a woman in the franchise, which is very, very progressive, and we're all about equality here, congratulations. Now one thing that always kind of bugged me is how Anya looks absolutely terrified as they plunge into the water. However, later on when she fires one of the weapons, she admits she stole the car blueprints on a previous mission. So what were you scared of, love? We then get the car going head to head with some goons underwater and Bond shows off the rest of his gadgets. These scenes were all filmed in the Bahamas around the same waters as Thunderball. It's extremely clear, and having perfected the underwater shots there, it just made sense to reuse the locale. They also approach Atlantis during this and peer inside a window to spot the baddies up to their nefarious plans. I always loved this shot, and when I was a little kid, I thought it was like, I don't know, like they were floating in space or something and looking down on the planet somehow. But obviously, it's just a big globe thing, and these big globes are a staple of the series, and later on, we get one on the tanker as well. Anyway, more baddies arrive, and we see the submersible weapons like mines and ink sprays. The latter was based off cephalopods, and you'll often see them spray ink when trying to escape from predators. So the foes are quickly dispatched, but with the car leaking, Bond decides to head to the surface. It's here that we actually get a cameo from Richard Keel's son RJ, who plays the first kid we see as the car exits the water. We also have a guy drinking who double takes his bottle, and pay close attention mate, pay very close attention, because this character will be back. Bond then drops a fish out the window, which is a nice little gag. This was suggested by Moore in the day, but Cubby said it was just too flippant. Excuse the pun. So they shot a version with and without it, but he ended up conceding after Moore's one got the most laughs. We then get a pretty personal scene with Anya and Bond where she asks him if he killed her lover.
Do you recognize him?
No, who is he?
The man I loved. Did you kill him?
She then vows to kill him when the mission's over, and the pair get lowered onto a sub. Tied together. Phew, awkward, mate. Moore just kills me here though, and I don't know how Barbara managed to keep a straight face. This is even more hilarious as she's told him he's a dead man and he's just sat there smiling, trying to win her round. Like, my kid will literally come in and destroy this room on a weekend, and then I'll just tell him off and he'll give me a little smile and I'll just forgive everything. On the sub, they also meet Commander Carter, who's played by series mainstay Shane Rimmer. Rimmer appeared in You Only Live Twice as a voice cameo in Live and Let Die, and is one of Willard White's men in Diamonds Are Forever. This is by far his most fleshed out role though, and it's great seeing him get a media part. Unfortunately, it would be his last, but he gets so much to do throughout this film, it's a great way to exit the series. He'd later go on to star in Batman Begins as well, and provided a lot of the iconic voices in Thunderbirds.
Major, you're most welcome to use the shower in my quarters.
You do not have to show me any special favors, Commander.
All the same, I think it might be better if I did.
Everyone's perving on the lass, and even this guy who's dropping off the clipboard, he leaves getting a cheeky glimpse as he closes the door. Long cold nights down on these subs, mate. We then get the reveal of what's happened to the subs and see the tanker swallowing them whole from a different point of view. This then leads to the biggest indoor set ever built at the time. Created by Ken Adam, they actually had to extend Pinewood Studios out to build it. This then became the legendary 007 stage, which still stands there today. On screen is what it looks like empty, and you can kind of fill the space mentally. Now, due to the size, Adam had difficulty lighting it. Cinematographer Claude Renoir's eyesight was deteriorating, and it was such a big space, it was difficult to do it justice. So guess what? Adam called in old pal and colleague Stanley Kubrick, who popped over to give some advice. And yeah, they lit it fantastically. You really wouldn't think this was a set, and it comes across as the actual interior of a tanker. The way they pull this off as well is that the water isn't as deep as it looks, and those obviously aren't real submarines. What do you mean Jaws' teeth aren't real? Instead, they're just the top half with them floating in the water to give the illusion of scale. In the Bond archive, they said when Adam was first starting out, he'd normally scale back his designs. However, come this film, he'd realised you could always find someone capable of building it, and just went all out. Adam achieved an Academy Award nomination for his work, and it's a fantastic piece of filmmaking. However, it didn't come without its risks. There's a moment where a stuntman has to fall from a height into the water lining the sub pot. This wouldn't be too bad if the pools were as deep as they look, but in real life, they were quite shallow. What do you mean Jaws' teeth aren't real? So they really had to plan out what angle to hit the water so the actor wouldn't get hurt. Don't know how he did it, mate, but they pulled it off, and yeah, again, fantastic. The whole crew's then taken as prisoners, with Bond and Anya going in disguise before they're both singled out. Judo chop! Stromberg then reveals his plan, which he nicked from You Only Live Twice, and he basically wants to start World War III. However, he has another idea beyond that and wants to create a brand new civilization.
Under the sea. Under the sea.
Now, I don't know how this plan will work, because Atlantis in the city, though big, I don't know if it's enough to create a new civilization down there. Also, all the guys who work for him on this tanker here, I'm guessing they've got guest passes, because you wouldn't sign up for this kind of scheme unless you were getting benefits of it. Unless there might be a henchman for hire, to be fair, who just goes along with whatever the plan is at the time. But yeah, guessing all these guys have a pass and probably don't want all their friends and families killed either. And if they want to start a civilization, they're gonna need women, so you've got to get them as well. And I just don't know if it would work, mate. Especially once you factor in food, oxygen, and all that shit. I just don't know, mate. Just don't know if you've thought this all through.
Not a great plan.
Anyway, Stromberg decides to head to Atlantis, and he takes Anya along with him in a lovely little model speedboat. Bond then makes a break for it, and we get another clear nod to You Only Live Twice. Bond ends up boarding a monorail and then frees the rest of the prisoners from the subs. It's exactly like how Bond rode in on the prior movie using a monorail and freed the astronauts there. But hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Anyway, it leads to a big shootout between both sides, which we haven't had for a while as a finale. I think the last time it happened was in Majesty's, and it's nice to see Moore get his own version. There's some hilarious over-the-top deaths, and also the sides neatly wearing red and blue to help tell them apart. They go all out with it though, and really use the environment to their advantage, with there being loads of explosions. Just a great shootout, and I think something like this would be like a really good multiplayer map. A new challenger enters wearing a white shirt as well to show he's a bit of a leader. In a one we watch him storm upstairs before then getting gunned down on the walkway. Turns out there's a big blast door with turret windows that's basically impenetrable. So though they have the outside, they're still up shit's creek when it comes to stopping the villain. However, there is a plan, and who better to penetrate some walls than James Bond? In what's a very, very tense scene, Bond disarms one of their warheads and then puts the detonator on their surveillance camera. He then rides it across to the wall before blowing it up. The music cut when he pulls the plug as well is just such a great editing choice.
Sir, what is it?
It's a really, really good scene that's more about building tension than it is a straight out gunfight, and I think it marries really well with the previous shootout. The soldiers then rush the control room, and using the tracking system, the subs fire on each other. The globe itself is also modelled after the Unisphere at the World's Fair in
New York City.
This idea of tricking them to fire missiles at each other was also actually lifted from Fleming's Moonraker novel, with this being how Bond defeats Hugo Drax as he flees England in his submarine. I love the little graphic on the globe though, as the missiles almost hit each other, and it's a pretty close call that just adds extra tension. We then watch several atomic explosions, and I always kind of felt bad for the innocent fish here. They then make a very, very slow getaway in the sub as the tanker explodes, and it closes out the biggest action scene in a Bond yet. You might also notice that the hull number is 593. According to IMDb trivia, this is the nod to the USS Thresher, which had the same hull designation. Thresher is described as being on eternal patrol, which is what's given to subs that are lost at sea and never end up coming home. But return this one does, and though the world has been saved, Anya's still with Stromberg. The commander has also been given orders to blow Atlantis sky high, so the woman who wants to kill you, the baddie who wants to kill you, they're all there, who blow the place up. Problem solved! Now, Bond refuses to leave her behind and begs for the sub to give him an hour. Asking for the package from Q, he then heads out on a top-of-the-range jet ski. Now this again is Bond at the cutting edge, as apparently this was the first time a jet ski had been shown in a film. It was so new they didn't know what to call it and were referring to it as a sea scooter, wet bike, and also a motorbike that rides on water, which didn't catch on surprisingly. The prototype was built by Nelson Howard and it could do up to 50 miles per hour. Bond gets there and he rides up in the elevator, and I love how he's already guessed it's got a trap door and it's just stood with his legs to the side.
You did want me to drop in.
This gives us a showdown with Bond and Stromberg where we watch him using his gigantic gun under the table. Bond rolls out of the way and then fires directly down it before walking slowly towards him, shooting him to death. I don't know how good of an idea it is, like firing down a barrel like this, because the bullet might bounce about or get stuck at the end, but great scene. However, behind the scenes, Moore got badly burned during this. They filmed the bit where the gun blows up his chair and then Moore sat down between takes. The pyrotechnic had left the seats scalding hot though, and it burned a third of his bum. Thus he had to take a break and go to hospital, but he said he quite enjoyed it as a nurse would massage oil into his arse every single day. Bond then goes looking for Anya, and we get the showdown that people are definitely more interested in. Bond vs Jaws is great, and I love the way it's kind of a chase through the compound. Even just Bond going to shoot him and hitting his teeth is one of those classic moments that I'll always remember. Bond then flees to the shark room and uses a magnet to drop him in the tank. Jaws shows how tough he is though, and even manages to take down a shark. The sub's also 5 minutes overdue, and thus they have to fire. Bond then comes across Anya tied up in a very skimpy red dress. Kinda just kills me, thinking of Stromberg picking this out from the shops and then getting her to dress in it. But I can tell you 15-year-old me was not complaining when the place starts to flood. We also have a whale's tailbone here as a decoration. Not a crazy detail, but just a nice bit of set design. The pair then manage to break out in a luxury escape pod. There's lovely cushions and a bottle of champagne, and it's just a nice way to spend your days floating on the sea.
Huh. Maybe I misjudged Stromberg. Any man who drinks Dom Perignon 52 can't be all bad.
However, Anya still has some unfinished business. She still has her need for revenge, and she shoots Bond dead there and then and lies with his body in this pod for several days waiting to get rescued. No, she doesn't do any of that, and Bond brings up his last request, which is to get out of those wet clothes, and they get it on while Jaws swims away. The pair then float on the sea, in the kind of ending you'd expect to see in a Connery film. The scene does go beyond that though, and they're picked up by their superiors.
Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British end up, sir.
It's one of those punchlines that I think is one of the most memorable in the series and is the perfect way to close out the movie. I also think it starts to highlight how this kind of environment is perfect for Moore. In You Only Live Twice, I think Connery felt a bit removed from his typical affair, and he clearly wasn't enjoying himself because of the stuff behind the scenes. Here though, we see how Moore would have tackled a movie like that, and whereas I think that's one of Connery's worst performances, Moore soars when it comes to keeping the British end up. Cubby even said down the line, this film was up there in his top 3 next to Russia and Goldfinger, and it's clear he was really proud of this movie. In the Bond archive, they then end this section with saying how much this movie proved you didn't need a Fleming novel or Connery in the role. Bond had gone beyond what made him massive, and it was now bigger than one author or actor. This was their biggest hit since Thunderball, and it made double what Golden Gun did. This also took the franchise over the $1 billion benchmark, making it the first film series to pass that milestone. It premiered at the Odeon in Leicester Square on the 7th of July 1977, giving us the date of the 7th of the 7th, 77, which was of course playing off Bond's number 007. I was also born on the 8th of the 8th, 88. Bit of heavy spoilers trivia for you there. We then close out with a sort of barbershop version of the song. I love when they do these alternate versions though, because yeah, they're so difficult to get on CD, and even on Spotify, they pretty much don't exist out in the wild. They often only exist in these movies, and yeah, just hearing it blare out here, great way to end the film. The credits and end teasing the next movie and announce that James Bond will return in For Your Eyes Only, which will be the next... wait a second. Okay, so if you know your Bond movies, then you know Moonraker's the next, so why did they change plans? Well, 1977 was of course a big year for movies, and there was a little film called Star Wars that changed cinema history. Because of the popularity of it, they decided to instead pivot to Moonraker. Which, yeah, you can totally understand, and I can imagine them watching that blow up and go, maybe we should just put Bond in space. In some darker bits of trivia as well, this is also the final film that Elvis Presley saw, and it's what Jose and Kitty Menendez were watching before they were killed by their sons Eric and Lyle. And we do have a breakdown of the Netflix series on our channel if you want to see their monster series. But yeah, the song's great and the perfect way to close out the film for the boys. And speaking of boys, I spoke to David Zaritsky about this film and how it kickstarted his journey with Bond. So, I am joined by none other than David Zaritsky. You guys recognize him. I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of months ago, and I thought I'd get you on to talk about The Spy Who Loved Me, because in the past we've talked Goldfinger, and I think this is often seen as being Roger Moore's Goldfinger. So, with that being said, do you remember where you were when you first saw it, or is there an impactful moment from this film that you enjoy or not enjoy? You tell me.
So many questions. How do we unravel this mystery? Well, first of all, for the first two questions, I do remember when I saw it because this was my very first Bond film I had ever seen. And I saw it, I'm this old, I saw it in the theaters as a child. I remember it's actually incredibly well, and I'll tell you why in a second. It was a very rainy day in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And anybody that knows Atlantic City, it's right on the Atlantic Ocean. There's a boardwalk, but when it rains, it's crap. So what does a father with 3 kids do? Well, he takes them, no matter what age, into the newest James Bond film, which was The Spy Who Loved Me. And I didn't know what a James Bond was or what I was looking at. And all I remember, I mean, like it was seared into my mind, was sharks and a guy with metal teeth. But yes. What I most remember about that day is right afterwards, my father took us for saltwater taffy, because that's what you do on the boardwalk. You get taffy and you rip out your baby teeth. And then he took me and he bought me the Corgi James Bond Goldfinger.
No way.
Right. So when you say this is like Roger Moore's Goldfinger, for me, it was introduction of Roger Moore, Goldfinger Corgi, all wrapped into like, bacon and prosciutto all wrapped up into one. It was amazing.
This is kind of like the opening of The Last Crusade, where we watched that young Indiana Jones going through like one origin story point to the next. If we were making like
That's
a
right.
David Zaritsky movie, I'm guessing that's how the film would start. You get that kind of rainy day, the stormy day, and then the brightness of the cinema. So what moments beyond Jaws and the Shark do you think stuck with you that clearly had a massive influence on your life?
Just to be totally transparent, I would love to say from then on, I was hooked and everything in my world was James Bond. Now, I was a Star Wars kid. But what I do remember is the bad guy's lair, of course. When and even like, when we talk about, and I'm sure we'll talk about the characters and things like that, the baddie, I remember as a child that he had webbed fingers, which most people don't even see until later in life. And just thinking like, is this guy a fish man? Like, what is he? So I was, just like today as a 57-year-old, I was most attracted to the fantasy aspects to it. The larger than life layers, Jaws' teeth, sharks. Like I couldn't, as a child, of course, put together the spy intrigue and the espionage and the woman, situation. But the bigger than life fantasy things had an impact. And when I think about it today as an adult, those are the things that I still come back to for all of my Bonds.
Yeah, I do think it kind of ticks a lot of those boxes, but it has its own unique identity. And I think the prior two films, they were kind of figuring out more and more, sort of making him, not in line with Connery, but almost figuring out what he was more in an opposite to Connery, because they were like, we'll give him a bourbon and ice, we'll make him smoke cigars, and you'll not have an Aston Martin. Whereas this film, they're like, well, we've taken that away and changed it for the sake of it. What are we going to do to make Moore's Bond his Bond? So do you think it holds up? Where do you rank it on your list in comparison to all the other ones as well?
So let's start with number 25 and work. No, 17 hours later. I would say, first of all, I really still appreciate this film. I have to tell you, when I was getting back into Bond in my early 30s, and I started to rewatch the movie saying, you know what, I do like James Bond. This was one of them that I used as sort of a waypoint. I remember watching Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, and The Spy Who Loved Me to get back into the mood of Bond. And this one, fashion, styles aside, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I was able to appreciate that this, like you said, ticked off all the criteria and tropes of this big sweeping Lawrence of Arabia type filming. It was very sumptuous looking. It's just a good film. It's a very satisfying James Bond film, but it's a very satisfying film. So it ranks pretty high. Now, this is not going to seem high to most Roger Moore lovers, but it is in my top 10. It is not my favorite Roger Moore movie. My favorite Roger Moore movie still is Live and Let Die. I love every aspect of that film, but this comes a close second in the Roger Moore compendium of films.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm just a sucker for a really good score, and I think when we talk about Quantum of Solace, I'll be like, I love that song. I know everyone hates it, but I love that song, so that really knocks it higher for me. I think nobody does it better. I mean, I've just played the song on repeat, and that when I had the CD collection, that was like my go-to song. It would kind of be like skip through some of the early ones, maybe stop at You Only Live Twice, stop at We Have All the Time in the World, and then kind of skip ahead to Nobody Does It Better, and then repeat. I think just the score in general as well, it's kind of updated and a bit more funky. We heard at Cue the Music, the ski scene, the score for that, and I'll go running and I'll just play that song. And I tell you, mate, when it kicks off, that's when I'm in my mood, and I start thinking I'm Rocky, and I just sprint as fast as I can. And there's just little moments like that. Obviously it introduces Jaws as well, who becomes a really popular character. You've got a good villain who kind of fits the GoldenEye archetype of being like an extremely wealthy guy. He's a bit creepy. There's something off about him, but he's got a great henchman. And yeah, I think it does tick a lot of those boxes. So as a whole, I think it's a solid movie. But David, this interview is not about me, it's about you. What are your treasured experiences that you've had since seeing this film? Because I know you meet a lot of actors and stuff. So what are your treasured moments?
Yeah, you know what it is? Unfortunately, Roger Moore is a Bond that I have never met. And I've heard so many things. He's the gentleman Bond, of course, that everybody said, and an incredible ambassador. So I have a lot of connection with that. But my treasured moments are the reason why everybody goes back to this film, and even non-Bond fans, and saying, like you said, it's an amazing score. Nobody does it better. It's the anthem for James Bond fans everywhere. When you see a montage of James Bond moments that are very emotional, that theme is playing. So theme, score, soundtrack, all of those things come together. The stunt. That opening pre-title sequence stunt. As much as I love the pre-title sequence to Tomorrow Never Dies, some of these other films, I'm sorry, I'm going to use the trope. Nobody does it better than that film with the parachute. I mean, there's just such an excitement, even to people that you show Bond films for the first time. It has the most, I'm going to say it, satisfying henchman. When you say henchman, you think Oddjob. But when you think fun, childlike henchman, you think of Jaws. And it has all those parts and pieces. And I have to tell you, like my collection, for example, has items from The Spy Who Loved Me, from, the ski pole to the teeth to all these parts and pieces, because it just has this fun factor. So I'm very emotionally and maybe even a bit physically connected to this. And who can forget the bell bottoms that he wears when he's crossing the desert with Barbara Bach? Nobody.
Yeah, nobody could forget that. Nobody wears those bell bottoms better. That should be what the song is. But yeah, that's a really good emotional tie to it. I think we've discussed some great history behind it, and I think it's going to be one of those films that, more seems to have a bit of a bad reputation a lot of the time. Like, people tend to skip his movies. Like, I know they've just released the Sean Connery 4K set collection, and they're doing the Pierce Brosnan ones next, and it's like, whoa, you've missed out a couple of people there. But going back on this retrospective, he was someone I was really excited to return to, because growing up, he was my Bond as a kid. And I think, Connery is sort of an adult version of Bond. Daniel Craig is obviously, quite gritty and dark maybe. I think Moore is kind of the on-ramp for a lot of kids. I think he just fits the tone perfectly for what kids want to see in a James Bond film. And for me, he was the on-ramp that got me obsessed with the character. I don't know if I'd be as head over heels if I was like, there was no more. So yeah, great film. Thank you for coming on to talk about this. We'll get you on the next big one, which I don't know when that'll be, but thank you again, David. As always, your work's fantastic. And guys, make sure you check out the Bond Experience. The channel has changed my life, maybe for the worst. We'll see in 10 years' time when I'm trying to sell things and get my money back for it. But I really appreciate your expertise. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks for
so
having me.
much for your hard work as always.
So that tops off the breakdown, and as I'm sure you can guess, this is top of my list. Coming in just above Goldfinger, I feel like this raises the bar and sets the standard going forward. Though that pretty much ticked the box on everything that makes a Bond movie, I just enjoy this film a bit more. Both are classics though, and set the standard for what we think of a Bond film, and both have several iconic moments. I'd love to hear your thoughts though, as I'm sure this one's going to be hotly debated, I feel. However, to me, this saved Bond and put him back in the big leagues. Making double what Golden Gun did, it put the franchise back on track. Finally, Moore felt like he was being his own man and had now stepped fully out of Sean's shadow. A quote I've always remembered from the Spy Hods podcast is that Moore showed he could disarm you with his charm rather than his fists. The tone of what we thought a Bond movie was altered from this point going forward, and the franchise became a lot more lighthearted. However, I think this struck the perfect balance. It created another peak for the franchise and locked in a new generation of Bond fans. This became an on-ramp for kids too young to see the films in the 60s, and everyone wanted more. How do you like it? Anyway, that wraps up the breakdown, and we'll be back next time for an out-of-this-world adventure. Bond in space! That takes us to Moonraker and our 12th breakdown in the series. I can't believe it's been over a year since we announced it, and I hope you guys are still enjoying it as much as I am. We've still got a long way to go as well though, with us being at about the halfway point. Please drop a like on the video to power me on and drop a comment with your thoughts on the film. If you want to follow us on Instagram as well, then make sure you check us out at Heavy Spoilers. Did you know as well that members of the channel also get early access to videos? If you click the join button, you get at least one breakdown a week before anyone else. Huge thank you to everyone who's done that, and with that out of the way, breakdown on screen right now. You keep watching it, mate. You know you love the Heavy Spoilers show, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Peace.